Section 1. The Border of Fear. A man stands at the edge of a foreign territory. The dry, relentless wind of the Negev desert. Or that Abraham tells a half-truth to Abimelech. The king of Gerar. The problem is that the story repeats. He assumed the Philistines possessed no moral restraint. But the Hebrew text exposes a devastating irony. The lack of Yahweh was not in the pagan king. It was in Abraham. And now, it is in Isaac. By looking at the armed men of Gerar and choosing to lie, the patriarchs were demonstrating who they truly feared. They surrendered their integrity because they yielded to the swords of Gerar rather than trusting the invisible promises of Yahweh. Once the pattern becomes visible, the story reads differently. This is how sin and trauma move through a family line. Isaac inherits the immense blessing of his father. He receives the divine covenant, the wealth, and the calling to bless the nations. But he also inherits his father's distinct brand of cowardice. The generational echo reveals that spiritual inheritance does not automatically erase human weakness. When the pressure of the famine mounts, Isaac instinctively reaches for the exact same survival mechanism that nearly destroyed his parents. This repetition is not just an embarrassing character flaw preserved for historical accuracy. It is a theological crisis. The biblical writer forces us to watch two generations of chosen leaders actively attempting to sabotage the very covenant they were called to carry. Decades pass. Abraham dies. A severe famine strikes the land, drying up the pastures and forcing a new generation to migrate for survival. The threat is no longer a localized dispute in the desert. The repetition of this lie threatens the entire architecture of the Bible. If a foreign king had taken Sarah, or if the men of Gerar had taken Rebekah, it would have destroyed much more than a marriage. Step back and look at the architecture of what is happening. The crisis in Gerar is not merely a domestic dispute or a temporary lapse in judgment. It is an assault on the central promise of the Bible. God's covenant with Abraham was not built on a military conquest, a political treaty, or a geographical fortress. It was built entirely on a biological miracle, a promised seed through Sarah, and later through Rebekah. God vowed to establish a lineage that would eventually bring forth the Messiah to restore humanity. Because of this singular promise, the wombs of the matriarchs were the most fiercely contested battlegrounds in the ancient world. Up to this point, our investigation has focused on the historical vulnerability of the alien. We have looked at the political pragmatism of the lie. But now the stakes escalate. When we zoom out to view the entire biblical pattern, the problem becomes cosmic. By standing at the border and lying about their wives, Abraham and Isaac were doing something far more dangerous than risking a kidnapping. They were literally Abraham's son. Isaac travels to the exact same territory. He stands at the exact same geographical border. He looks at his own beautiful wife, Rebekah, handing the promised seed, the vehicle of world redemption, over to a pagan king. If Abimelech takes Sarah, the lineage of Isaac is corrupted or erased. If the men of Gerar take Rebekah, the covenant family is fractured. To secure their own physical survival, the patriarchs are actively participating. In the dismantling of God's redemptive plan, the men chosen to be the guardians of the promise have become its greatest threat. This reveals the hidden mechanism of the narrative. We often assume that God's plans require our perfect cooperation. The stories in Gerar prove otherwise. God does not intervene in this territory because Abraham and Isaac are faithful. He intervenes because they are faithless. God is not just protecting Sarah and Rebekah from the men of the city. He is relentlessly protecting the covenant from the patriarchs themselves. In Isaac's case, the truth is not revealed by a terrifying divine dream in the middle of the night. It is revealed by a careless moment of intimacy. After a long period of living under the exhausting weight of the deception, Isaac lets his guard down, perhaps believing he is unobserved in the heavy heat of the afternoon. King Abimelech looks down through a window and sees Isaac showing marital affection to Rebekah. The lie shatters in an instant. The king summons Isaac, and the historical echo is deafening, and he rehearses the exact same lie. He tells the men of the city that she is his sister. Two patriarchs, one foreign kingdom. For the second time in biblical history, A Philistine king unleashes a righteous rebuke against a chosen patriarch. Abimelech demands, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." Once again, it is the foreign warlord who establishes the moral boundary. And once again, the pagan king issues a decree of protection over the prophet of God. Abimelech commands his entire kingdom that whoever touches Isaac or Rebekah will be put to death. God's grace proves to be stubbornly persistent. The marriages are secure, and the covenant line is preserved. But the tension in Gerar is far from over. The king's decree protects the patriarch's wife, but it does not erase the deep, underlying hostility of the local population. The fear of death has been removed, but the threat to Isaac's survival immediately shifts to another vital resource. With the marriages untouchable, the envy of the Philistines turns toward the dirt, the stone. And the one thing a nomad needs more than anything else in the blinding heat of the desert, the decree of the king guaranteed Isaac's life. But it could not legislate the hearts of the Philistines. The exact same deception, echoing perfectly across a generation. And this repetition forces a deeply unsettling contradiction to the surface. Protected by Abimelech, Isaac remains in the territory of Gerar and begins to plant crops. The text tells us that in that same year, he reaps 100-fold. His flocks multiply, his herds grow massive, and his household expands into a sprawling economic empire. But in the ancient Near East, staggering prosperity in the hands of a stateless foreigner is a dangerous provocation. The Philistines watch the wealth of this alien nomad explode, and their tolerance quickly ferments into a deep, aggressive envy. Because of the king's public oath, the men of Gerar cannot kill Isaac directly, so they choose a covert, devastating tactic to drive him out. They go out into the fields and deliberately stop up every well that had been dug in the days of Abraham, filling them completely with earth. To a modern reader, filling a well sounds like a petty nuisance, a minor act of agricultural vandalism. But in the unforgiving, arid environment of the Negev desert, it was an act of war. Digging a well through layers of rock and hardened earth using Bronze Age tools was a staggering engineering achievement. It required immense labor, wealth, and time. More importantly, in ancient customary law, a flowing well served as a physical claim to the surrounding territory. In both of these narratives, the chosen men of God act out of cowardly self-preservation. They are willing to sacrifice their wives, and by extension the promised lineage. By filling Abraham's wells with dirt, the Philistines are not just causing an inconvenience, they are violently erasing Isaac's historical and legal anchor to the land. They are deliberately choking off the lifeblood of his massive flocks. It is a calculated strategy to force his migration through economic starvation. The tension breaks when King Abimelech personally comes to Isaac with a blunt command: "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." The king legally exiles the very man he just protected. Isaac obeys. He moves his camp away from the city and down into the valley of Gerar. He begins the arduous task of redigging his father's ancient wells, clearing out the dirt of Philistine envy. But when Isaac's servants dig a fresh well in the valley and strike a vein of living spring water, the local herdsmen of Gerar arrive and violently claim it. The water is ours, they demand. Isaac refuses to order a counterattack. Instead, he names the well Esek, a Hebrew word meaning contention. He moves further out, digs another well, and the exact same thing happens. The Philistines pursue him, aggressively disputing his right to the water. Isaac names this second well Sitnah, which means enmity or hostility. The pressure is escalating. The names of the wells trace a map of increasing aggression, from an argument over property to outright hatred of the covenant, simply to save their own lives. Meanwhile, the pagan king of Gerar is the one who displays superior moral integrity. Notice the excruciating vulnerability of Isaac's position. He is the son of the promise, chosen by God to inherit this entire land. He possesses immense wealth. He has a massive household entirely capable of fighting. Yet, He is being systematically bullied out of the territory. Every time he builds a life-sustaining resource, the local warlords steal it. We expect the patriarch to finally draw a line in the sand. We expect a display of righteous force to defend his God-given inheritance. The tension builds around a single question. Will Isaac fight for his rights? Or will he allow himself to be pushed entirely out of the promised land? But Isaac refuses to wage war. He will not match the hostility of Gerar with his own violence. Instead, he packs up his tents, rounds up his massive flocks, and moves yet again, retreating further into the arid wilderness until the narrative completely breaks open. Isaac moves a third time. He travels further into the dry expanse, sets up his camp, and orders his servants to dig again. This time, no one from Gerar follows them. No armed herdsmen arrive to violently claim the water. The well flows undisturbed. Isaac names it Rehoboth, meaning broad places or room, declaring, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." It is Abimelech who is horrified by the deception. It is the foreign warlord who acts with righteous indignation. But the geographical retreat is only half the resolution. To find true security, Isaac moves up to Beersheba. The very night he arrives, the God of his father appears to him in the darkness. God does not demand an explanation for Isaac's earlier cowardice. He does not scold him for the lie at the border. Instead, God speaks directly to the root of Isaac's failure. "Fear not, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your offspring." The God of the covenant actively dismantles the terror of the alien. And immediately after this divine reassurance, the physical world outside Isaac's tent validates the promise. A diplomatic envoy approaches the camp. It is King Abimelech, accompanied by his trusted advisor and Phicol, the commander of his army. The sudden arrival of a Philistine king and his top general would typically signal violence. Isaac steps out to meet them, understandably guarded. He asks a blunt, perfectly reasonable question. "Why have you come to me? Seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you?" Abimelech's response is one of the most stunning admissions in the book of Genesis. The pagan warlord looks at the nomadic immigrant he had just exiled and says, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you." The king has not come to wage war. He has come to beg for a peace treaty, sharply rebuking the prophets of God for their lack of basic decency. The question is not whether these men actually lied. Notice what is happening. Abimelech does not seek an alliance because Isaac possesses a superior military force. He does not come because Isaac acted with flawless moral courage. In fact, Abimelech knows exactly how weak and fearful Isaac can be. He has already publicly rebuked him for his deception, but the foreign king recognizes something far more terrifying than a standing army. He sees the relentless, unmerited favor of Yahweh resting on a deeply flawed man. He watched Isaac's crops explode in a famine. He watched Isaac uncover ancient water in a desert. He realizes that fighting this vulnerable patriarch is the equivalent of fighting God himself. The king asks for an oath of non-aggression. Isaac, the man who was violently pushed out of Gerar, agrees. He does not gloat. He does not demand reparations. He prepares a feast for his enemies. They eat and drink together, and the next morning, they swear an oath of peace. On the exact same day, the Philistine king departs in safety. Isaac's servants arrive from the valley with a vital report. "We have found water." Isaac names the new well Sheba, cementing the name of the city. Beersheba, the well of the oath. The historical conflict is over. The vulnerability of the patriarch is finally covered, not by his own clever manipulation, but by a treaty recognized by his enemies. God has taken a man who compromised his wife out of pure panic and elevated him so highly. The deeper question is why the biblical writer exposed this generational failure so blatantly. Why did both Abraham and Isaac look at the territory of Gerar, that a king is forced to negotiate for his own survival? The historical dispute in the desert ends with an oath and a flowing well. But the story is not quite finished. This ancient failure was recorded for a reason, and it forces us to look away from the plains of Gerar and look directly into a mirror. What do we do when we realize that we, too, carry the exact same fears as the patriarchs? The treaty at Beersheba is a beautiful historical resolution, but it leaves us with an uncomfortable truth. We prefer to read the failures of Abraham and Isaac as distant historical mistakes. We study their deception as a strange cultural quirk of the ancient Near East, confident that we would never hand over our families to a foreign king. But the mechanism of Gerar is not ancient. It is human. The territory of Harar is not simply a geographical location on a map. It is an emotional state. Gerar is any place, any relationship, or any crisis where you look at your circumstances and suddenly conclude that God's promises are no longer sufficient to keep you safe. What is your Gerar? It might be a hostile corporate environment where you believe that operating with integrity will cost you your career. It might be a fragile relationship where you hide your true convictions because you fear being abandoned, carrying fine dust against his skin. Beside him is his wife. Ahead of them lies Gerar, a prosperous Philistine stronghold governed by a powerful local king, and conclude that God's promises could not protect them there. And what does it reveal about the nature of God's covenant when the very men chosen? It might be a financial crisis where you quietly bend the rules to manufacture a margin of safety, or a long season of waiting where you decide to force a door open that God has clearly kept closed. When we enter those territories, we instinctively reach for the exact same survival mechanism. We substitute trust for control. We compromise. We manipulate the situation to protect ourselves because, deep down, our internal justification sounds exactly like Abraham's. He looked at the Philistines and decided, there is no fear of God in this place. We look at our modern crises and say the exact same thing. We assume that God might govern our theology, but he cannot possibly protect us in the ruthless reality of this specific, practical emergency. But the text forces us to confront the brutal cost of that compromise. Look closely at the collateral damage of the wife-sister deceptions. By trying to guarantee their own survival, Abraham and Isaac brought severe judgment upon an entire foreign kingdom. They placed the people they were supposed to love in extreme danger. Our manipulation operates the exact same way. It may offer a temporary illusion of safety, but it always creates chaos for the people around us. To carry it are the ones threatening to destroy it. This is not ultimately a story about patriarchal heroism. It is a story about divine faithfulness. When we operate out of fear, someone else always pays the price. Yet, the most shocking revelation in this narrative is not the weakness of the patriarchs. It is the relentless grace of God. When Abraham and Isaac act out of cowardly self-preservation, God does not abandon them. He does not tear up the covenant and search for a braver family. He steps directly into the mess they created. He intercepts the foreign king. He protects the promised seed. He covers their faithlessness with his own faithfulness. When you find yourself standing at the border of your own Gerar, feeling the overwhelming pressure to compromise, you have to practice a different response. Recognize what is happening in your own heart. Name the fear honestly. Acknowledge that you are tempted to manipulate the situation to secure your own survival. Then, place that fear within the larger truth of this biblical pattern. Choose the concrete response of integrity, even when it looks dangerously vulnerable, and release the final result to God. The patriarchs failed, but the water of blessing still flowed. They operated out of blind panic, yet God still commanded the respect of their enemies. There is a greater, redemptive reality at work. The story of Gerar leaves us with one final, transforming image. In the face of human fear, to find the answer, we have to follow the patriarchs deep into this hostile territory. Step back and look at the complete architecture of Gerar. This narrative spans 2 generations, beginning with a terrified father lying at the border, and ending with a son swearing a peace treaty over a flowing well. When we pull back the historical details, the story compresses into 3 distinct truths. First, it reveals that God's redemptive plan is utterly resilient. It survives even the faithless manipulation of the very men chosen to carry it. Second, it exposes the severe danger of generational sin. demonstrating how a father's unaddressed fear echoes flawlessly into his son's panic. Finally, and most importantly, it proves that true security for the people of God is never found in clever deception or military strength. Think back to the opening image. A desperate man stood at the edge of a foreign territory. Rehearsing a lie, he looked at the border of Gerar and saw only his own vulnerability. He saw a powerful king, an armed city, and a hostile landscape. He believed that the only way to survive was to rely on a manufactured half-truth. Now, bring that same geographical border back into view, but watch how the meaning has transformed. The narrative does not end with fear. It ends with a well. Isaac names his undisturbed well Rehoboth, declaring that the Lord has made room for them. The well transforms from a symbol of fierce, violent contention. Their journey is marked by a recurring physical symbol that will connect their greatest fears to their final peace, the well, into a monument of unmerited grace. In a desert where water is life, God provided a spring that no enemy could stop up. Centuries later, Jesus of Nazareth will sit by another well, Jacob's well, dug by Isaac's own son, and tell a Samaritan woman that he himself offers living water. He takes the ancient symbol of physical survival and turns it into the ultimate promise of spiritual security. Jesus becomes the true Rehoboth. He is the broad place where the vulnerable find room to breathe. He is the one who secures the covenant, not by lying to a foreign power to save his own life, but by standing before a Roman governor in complete silence, offering his life to save a faithless people. When you feel the urge to compromise, to manipulate your circumstances, or to manage your own survival out of fear, remember the wells of Gerar. The covenant is secure not because of you, but because of him. The peace of God is not fragile. It does not depend on your flawless performance. You do not have to fight for every drop of water in the desert. You do not have to lie at the border. The Lord has made room for you. If this exploration helped you understand the depth of Scripture, in the arid landscape of the ancient Near East, a well was much more than a source of drinking water. It was a physical claim to the land. Consider sharing it with someone who is currently walking through their own Gerar. The fear at the border is real, but the water is already flowing, a magnet for fierce territorial contention, and the ultimate test of survival. By tracing their path from a whispered lie at the border to an oath sworn over a flowing well, we will see what actually sustains the people of God. But before we can reach the water, we have to understand the terror at the border, to understand why 2 generations of men believed this lie was their only hope. We have to step out of modern theology and into the dust of the ancient world. We have to understand what it meant to be a landless wanderer crossing into Gerar. The man is not preparing a weapon. He is not setting up a defensive perimeter. He is preparing a story. He turns to his wife. To modern readers, the patriarchs of Genesis often feel like monumental figures, carved in theological marble. We picture them moving through the ancient landscape with an aura of divine invincibility. But if you were standing on the plains of Gerar in the 2nd millennium BC, Abraham and Isaac did not look like untouchable heroes. They looked like targets. Gerar was a prosperous city-state, a walled fortress rising out of the agricultural plains of the Negev. Inside those walls was an established king, Abimelech, supported by a standing military, a locale legal code, and a network of fortified alliances. Outside the walls were the patriarchs. They lived in temporary shelters made of woven goat hair. They moved with the seasons, and most dangerously, they operated without the protection of a national border. In the ancient Near East, a person's safety was entirely dependent on their tribe or their king. If a man was murdered in his own city, his family or his ruler would avenge his blood. That threat of retaliation kept people alive. But when Abraham, and later Isaac, crossed into Gerar, they entered as what the Hebrew text calls a ger, a resident alien, a sojourner, an immigrant without citizenship, lowering his voice against the wind, and rehearses the deception they are about to tell the men of the city. Tell them you are my sister. The ger had no legal standing. They could not appeal to the local courts. They had no king to threaten war on their behalf. If a local warlord decided to kill a juror, there were no political consequences. The blood simply soaked into the sand, and the city moved on. This extreme vulnerability was compounded by a dangerous combination: massive wealth and beautiful wives. Abraham and Isaac were not poor refugees. They traveled with vast flocks of sheep and cattle, heavy stores of silver and gold, and hundreds of servants. To a local ruler, this wandering camp looked like an unprotected treasury. And in the brutally pragmatic politics of the ancient world, there was a simple way for a king to acquire that wealth. If he took the patriarch's wife into his royal harem, the patriarch's wealth and resources would naturally be absorbed into the king's estate. But there was one obstacle. Ancient rulers, even pagan ones, preferred to avoid the social stigma of openly stealing another man's wife. It was much cleaner, politically speaking, to simply kill the husband first. Once the husband was dead, the woman was a vulnerable widow, and the king could play the role of the benevolent rescuer by taking her into his palace. Most readers of Genesis are familiar with this uncomfortable moment. We usually interpret it as a bizarre, temporary lapse in judgment. When we understand this brutal historical reality, the fear at the border suddenly makes sense. Abraham and Isaac were not suffering from irrational paranoia. They were reading the geopolitical landscape with absolute accuracy. If the men of Gerar knew Sarah or Rebekah were married to these wealthy, landless nomads, the men of Gerar had a powerful incentive to murder them. So, they calculated the risk and manufactured a solution. Tell them you are my sister. If the woman was a sister, the king would have to negotiate with the brother to arrange a marriage. This would buy the patriarch time. It would ensure his survival. It was a pragmatic political strategy designed to navigate a highly dangerous world. But their strategy created a massive theological problem. By giving their wives over to a foreign king to protect their own lives, they were attempting to secure their physical survival at the expense of God's covenant. The fear was historically justified, but the compromise was spiritually catastrophic. The lie was meant to buy them safety. Instead, it triggered a divine emergency. Because when Abraham handed Sarah over to the king of Gerar, in Sunday schools and Bible studies, it is often taught as a strange footnote in the life of Abraham. Heaven did not remain silent. The narrative moves from the dusty tents of the alien into the heavily guarded bedchamber of the king. Night falls on the fortified city of Gerar. Inside the royal palace, King Abimelech is asleep, secure behind heavy stone doors and armed guards. He has just brought a new woman into his household, the sister of a wealthy, wandering nomad. To the king, it is a standard political arrangement, a peaceful way to absorb a powerful foreigner's resources. But the silence of the palace is suddenly broken by a voice that does not belong to the local gods of the Philistines. The God of Israel invades the king's dream with a terrifying, absolute verdict. Behold, you are a dead man. The threat is severe because the stakes are cosmic. God tells Abimelech that he is about to die because the woman he has taken is a man's wife. If the king touches Sarah, the lineage of the promised seed is compromised. The entire future of the covenant, the birth of Isaac, and the eventual arrival of the Messiah hang by a single thread in a pagan king's bedroom. God is moving ruthlessly to protect the architecture of redemption. But here is where the biblical text introduces a shocking moral inversion. Abimelech does not cower like a guilty man. He has not yet touched Sarah, and he protests his innocence. He argues that he acted with a clear conscience, based entirely on the word of Abraham. And, surprisingly, God agrees. A momentary panic from a man who is otherwise remembered as the great, unshakable father of faith. With the pagan king, the Lord responds, "Yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me." Step back and look at the structure of this scene. The writer of Genesis is doing something deeply subversive. In the ancient Near East, national histories were written as propaganda to glorify their founders. hiding their flaws and exaggerating their courage. But the biblical text exposes its founder completely, the father of the faith. The man chosen to carry the divine blessing to the world is revealed as a fearful manipulator. Meanwhile, the foreign warlord, the supposed enemy, is the one who acts with moral clarity. The next morning, the tension spills out of the dream and into the physical world. A terrified Abimelech summons Abraham. The king of Gerar looks at the chosen prophet of God and delivers a devastating rebuke. "What have you done to us?" Abimelech demands. "How have I sinned against you? That you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done." Abraham has no defense. He stammers out a weak excuse about his survival, admitting that he looked at Gerar and concluded, "There is no fear of God at all in this place." But Abraham was wrong. God was entirely capable of commanding the fear of a foreign king. We naturally assume it is simply a story about a biblical hero making a mistake, learning his lesson, and moving forward. By intercepting Abimelech, God was not just protecting Sarah from the Philistines. He was protecting the covenant from Abraham himself. God rescues Abraham from his own disastrous compromise. The king restores Sarah, offers Abraham land, and sends him away with wealth. The emergency is resolved. We might expect this terrifying grace to permanently alter the family lineage. We might assume the descendants of Abraham would forever remember that God's protection does not require human deception. But trauma and fear have a way of haunting bloodlines. Decades pass. The generation of Abraham dies. A severe famine strikes the land, drying up the pastures and forcing the nomadic camp to move. And Abraham's son finds himself staring at the exact same border. The dust settles over a desperate camp. A severe famine has scoured the land of Canaan, cracking the earth and drying up the pastures. Isaac, the son of the promise, is forced to migrate to keep his family and his flocks alive. He follows the ancient routes and arrives at the territory of Gerar. The king is different, likely a dynastic title given to a new Abimelech, but the geopolitical danger is identical. When the local men of the city notice the beauty of Isaac's wife, Rebekah, the tension immediately spikes. And in Genesis 26, Isaac makes a decision that echoes with devastating precision. He tells the men of the place, "She is my sister." But the biblical text refuses to let us read the story that smoothly. The problem is not simply that the verse is unclear. Isaac's deception is even more blatant than his father's. Years earlier, Abraham could hide behind a historical technicality, as Sarah was indeed his half-sister. Isaac has no such loophole. Rebekah is his cousin. It is a pure, unadulterated lie, manufactured in a moment of blinding panic. When the biblical writer records Isaac's internal justification, he uses a specific term that unlocks the psychological architecture of the patriarchs. Isaac explains his lie to himself, "Lest the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah." The driving force behind this decision is the Hebrew root yar, pronounced Yah-Reh. In its basic grammatical form, it is translated simply as fear, terror, or reverence. The translation is accurate, but the English word is narrower than the Hebrew expression. In modern English, fear is primarily an internal emotion, a feeling of anxiety, but in the ancient Near East, Yere was an active, directional force. It described who or what commanded your ultimate submission. To fear something was to alter your physical behavior in response to its power. Throughout the biblical text, Yare is consistently used to contrast two opposing forces, the fear of man and the fear of God. When Abraham stood in Gerar a generation earlier, he justified his deception by claiming, "There is no Yare of God in this place."